Last week's Yoon-Biden summit garnered much media attention as the leaders of South Korea and the U.S. sought to ease security concerns in light of North Korea's nuclear intentions, as well as ensure economic security in light of disruptions to supply chains and even health security as we seek life amid COVID-19. So what have been the major topics of foreign media coverage regarding the Yoon-Biden summit? What has been the regional response to the Washington Declaration as covered by the media? And what lies ahead as countries seek to boost their national interests while promoting global causes? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today, we address details of last week's Yoon-Biden summit as covered by the foreign media. For this, I have Jacco Zwetsloot here in the studio. Jacco, it's good to have you back.
Hi, thank you for having me again.
I also have Nicola Smith with us. Nicola, welcome back.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Right, Jacco, let's start off then with the joint press conference between the leaders, that is, of South Korea and the U.S. Now, they announced the Washington Declaration as one way of countering North Korea's nuclear weapons ambitions. What are the implications of this particular declaration for North Korea, do you think?
Well, I had a quick look at the Washington Declaration last night, and it looks to me like a reaffirmation and a 21st century upgrade of the U.S.-ROK Mutual Defense Treaty, which was signed way back on the 1st of October 1953. Now, in this declaration, we see the word peace mentioned 3 times, and we see that the United States and South Korea are committed to peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific, which also includes the Korean Peninsula. So they're reaffirming basically a lot of what was already the case, but Korea has in this declaration reaffirmed its long-standing commitment to its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So Korea will not be getting any nuclear weapons this time or any time soon. And the declaration ends with a sentence, both presidents remain steadfast in their pursuit of dialogue and diplomacy with the DPRK without preconditions as a means to advance the shared goal of achieving the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. So those are the most important points, I think, of this Washington Declaration. I don't see any tensions being raised from this at all. It's simply a restatement of all the things that were there before, and that the US and South Korea are very strong alliance partners who will respond together to any threats, both to Korea directly and more broadly in the Indo-Pacific region.
Right. And Nicola, based on your observation here in South Korea, do you see this particular declaration as perhaps serving to ease tensions with regard to security among the public here?
Well, there are certainly some significant developments that could go some way to alleviate some of the concerns that the public have, at least temporarily. You have a commitment by the US to deploy a nuclear ballistic submarine on rotation. You also have the Nuclear Consultation Group that will draw South Korea more into the decision-making process in terms of planning to deter or react to a nuclear incident. However, you have had consistent polling over at least the last decade that shows that a majority of the public are in favour of South Korea having its own nuclear assets. And most recent surveys have shown that that's gone up to 70% of the population. So I don't think that will change overnight. And I do think that that's partly because, first of all, South Korea is on the front line of escalating tensions with North Korea. And secondly, that South Korea is also a global power in its own right. And it's natural that people would want to have more control of their defence, no matter how strong a partner is and how much they are offering. And part of that hesitancy is rooted just in the unpredictable nature of politics. It's a legitimate concern among the public here that perhaps the US might not want to sacrifice one of its own cities in favour of saving Seoul. There are fresh memories of President Trump and how he threatened to withdraw 28,500 troops from the peninsula if Seoul did not pay up more. And so that memory is fresh. Nobody knows who's going to win the next election. And also, we are looking at the possibility that North Korea might trigger a 7th nuclear test, which will certainly move the dial in terms of public opinion on whether Korea should have its own nuclear weapons. And there will be a lot, if that happens, there will be a lot more pressure on President Yoon to react, even from his own conservative supporters, but also we're seeing senior politicians like the mayor of Seoul who is talking about South Korea having its own nuclear umbrella.
Right. Meanwhile, Jacco, North Korea's Kim Yo-jong has also taken to insulting U.S. President Joe Biden. She called him an old man with no future. Do you suppose this kind of vulgar rhetoric by North Korea is an indication of sorts with regard to its concerns about the stronger Seoul-Washington alliance?
In a word, yes. As many of my interviewed guests have told me on the NK News podcast over the last 5 years, one of the main things that North Korea wants to see is a collapse of the alliance between the Republic of Korea and the United States, or at the very least a distancing, a lack of closeness and coordination. So Pyongyang is happiest when things are frosty between Washington and Seoul, and is unhappy when relations are tight, as they clearly are now. Now, if you look at North Korean propaganda over the years, this kind of salty language by Kim Yo-jong is completely par for the course. It's not surprising at all. If you remember back to when Park Geun-hye was president, North Korea sent little propaganda leaflets under balloons over Seoul, and there were some very grotesque visual caricatures, not only of Park Geun-hye but also of other leaders, and even President Moon Jae-in in his early years before the 2018 Winter Olympics détente, and even as far back as when Kim Dae-jung was president in his early time as president, before they had the 2000 summit in Pyongyang, they were using angry rhetoric and propaganda about him, calling him nasty names too. So Kim Yo-jong accused President Biden of being senile and seemed particularly angry at a phrase uttered by President Biden which echoed a sentence that was in the U.S. Department of Defense National Defense Strategy Update. And the sentence is, any nuclear attack by North Korea against the United States or its allies and partners is unacceptable and will result in the end of that regime. Now, Kim Yo-jong, of course, focuses on the threat to North Korea at the end of that regime, but doesn't focus on the conditional phrase, any nuclear attack by North Korea. And that's normal behavior, as I said, by North Korea to focus only on the negative part for them rather than on the first part of the statement. So I don't see anything here that North Korea should be afraid of. As long as North Korea doesn't launch any nuclear attack against the United States or any of its allies or partners, it has no reason to fear any external threats to its regime stability.
Right. And beyond North Korea, Nicola, during their joint statement, Presidents Yoon and Biden also underscored the need for peace and stability within the Taiwan Strait. Now, China, as expected, slammed the mention of Taiwan by the two leaders, while Russia, of course, took issue with the Washington Declaration itself. Do you suppose, Nicola, that we're looking ahead to perhaps heightened tensions between the U.S. and its allies and China as well as Russia?
Well, we're already in a state of heightened tensions with Russia and with China, and that raises the first question of who is causing those tensions. And the fact is that Russia has invaded Ukraine. China is also threatening democratic Taiwan with a military takeover. The second question then is, how do you address those heightened tensions? And do you do that with resolve, or do you do that by compromising your own principles of democracy and freedom and all of the values that you believe in? And the message that President Yoon, the clear message that he gave in the United States was that the Ukraine war is a violation of international law and an attempt to unilaterally change the status quo, and that Korea will stand in solidarity with the free world. And so you have Russia, who are criticizing the idea of nuclear cooperation deal between the United States and South Korea. And at the same time, it's also threatening a nuclear apocalypse over Ukraine. They have suspended their participation in the New START nuclear arms reduction treaty with the U.S. So who is it here who is the aggressor, and who is it here who's destabilizing the situation? Meanwhile, you have Beijing intimidating Taiwan, a democracy of some 24 million people, and daily with military aircraft and naval ships around the island, and also threatening to invade if Taipei does not agree to unify with Beijing. Again, who is destabilizing the situation? So when you have President Yoon and President Biden who are calling for peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, how is that controversial? How is peace and stability controversial? You also had China recently reacting to President Yoon's statement on Taiwan that it's a global issue, that his objections to changing the status quo by force, and this is all true. We can't run from the truth. Maintaining a neutral stance now on the Taiwan issue it's simply not sustainable in the current era. So, a conflict would draw everybody in the region and beyond into the situation. It would destroy the global economy. And so when you're faced with bullying behaviour, deterrence is key here. And you can't deal with bullying behaviour by staying silent. If you don't speak out against authoritarian countries that are seeking to take over neighbouring democracies, then that carries its own risk. And so with Russia and China claiming that this heightens tensions without taking any responsibility themselves, then that's just diplomatic gaslighting.
Right. Jacco, Nicola mentioned Ukraine, and prior to President Yoon's departure for the U.S., there was quite a bit of speculation here on the local front about potential military aid to Ukraine by South Korea. Given Seoul's tensions with Pyongyang, Jacco, do you suppose the Yoon administration has more to gain by bolstering its support for the cause in Ukraine?
Yeah, it's a good question. What is there to gain by helping Ukraine to fight off Russian aggression? And that also is related to the question of how can national interest be defined. Now, there's at least two different ways of looking at the issue. And one of them is that the Republic of Korea received help back in 1950 from 16 nations to fight back aggression from North Korea and then later from the Chinese People's Volunteers. So by helping Ukraine now to defend itself against Russian invasion, Korea is paying forward the help that it received over 70 years ago. And President Yoon, in fact, referred to this in his speech to the joint houses of the U.S. Congress. So this helps to raise Korea's standing in the world as a responsible state actor that President Yoon pledged it would be, and a leader among nations, in a similar way perhaps to its hosting the next World Summit for Democracy. Now, on the other hand, South Korean businesses and citizens who live in Russia or who operate in Russia will most definitely suffer some financial losses as a result of South Korea choosing to support Ukraine. So they're against giving aid in any situation, and they're in fact trying to pressure President Yoon and his government to make a clear statement that they will not provide aid under any circumstances. So in short, there are no immediate material gains to be made, but there is some potential increase in soft power and prestige that Korea may enjoy in the mid to long term.
Right. Nicola, beyond security concerns, there's been a bit of a mixed reaction here with regard to the two leaders' talks about the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act and the U.S. CHIPS Act, which I believe are also of concern to European countries, these American industrial policies. That being said, what are the tasks ahead, do you suppose, for all parties involved amid efforts to uphold national interests while at the same time promote global joint ventures on the economic front?
Well, yes, it's definitely a difficult balance to maintain. And let's look, first of all, at what the presidents agreed to. They agreed to consult and coordinate closely so that the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act and CHIPS and Science Act can further strengthen and supply cooperation between the two countries in advanced technology. And that laid a foundation, certainly, for a more expansive ventures, joint ventures, particularly in the crucial semiconductor industry. And I think President Biden made a very good point that we saw during the pandemic shortfalls in the supply chain. And certainly that is a very crucial question that many countries have to address, not just Korea and the US, but also Europe. And President Biden also stressed that since he's taken office, that Korean companies have invested over $100 billion in the US, which has created jobs both in Korea and in the United States. We see that two of Korea's biggest companies are already investing in the semiconductor industry there as well. But at the same time, the presidents didn't really offer much detail about how to address the concerns of Korean companies, namely that too much information is required to qualify for US subsidies, and also their concerns on restrictions about investing in China. President Biden tried to stress that this is not about China, this is about supply chains, that we don't have anything against China, although there are restrictions on certain kinds of semiconductors there. And so these details will need to be thrashed out by officials in both of the administrations. And that's perfectly normal, but I think it will take a while for them to really get over the biggest hurdles and the biggest concerns of South Korean companies. The South Korean Industry Minister, Minister Lee, he met with his counterpart, the US Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, and they agreed to try and minimize these uncertainties and the business burdens that chip makers have. But they're still at the start of that process, and so they've started what they've called a supply chain and commercial dialogue, and I expect that we'll see, as that moves forward, that they'll bring in private and public groups who have interests in this industry, just to try and find some solutions that will allow joint ventures to go ahead while maintaining national interests.
Right, hopefully. Jacco, on the cultural front, Netflix had announced a very hefty investment in Korean content over the next 4 years, I believe $2.5 billion US. President also attended a cultural forum while he was in Washington, D.C. You mentioned soft power earlier. And that being said then, Jacco, what has been the role of soft power on the cultural front with regard to bolstering Korea's image on the international arena?
Yeah, first, quickly on Netflix. It is true that Netflix has pledged to invest, as you said, $2.5 billion or 3.3 trillion won over the next 4 years. Now, one South Korean media outlet that I looked at earlier calculated that Netflix probably spent $800 billion last year alone on Korean content. If that's accurate, then 3.3 trillion won spread over 4 years is actually not much of an increase at all. And definitely not something that is the result of President Yoon's personal visit. That said, soft power, including everything from dramas to music, films, esports, K-beauty products, and so on, has played a huge role in bolstering Korea's image on the international stage. Korea used to be that country that people would fly over on their way to Tokyo or Beijing, but now Seoul is an attractive destination, and people actually want to come here and live here and work here and be a part of the dynamism that they see in Korea. So this is a big change from when I came here for the first time 27 years ago, and that's a big win for Korea. Korea is really enjoying its moment in the sun. Now, the Korean government likes to, at various times, claim credit for all of this work, and I don't know how fair that is. I've spoken to several people in the creative space in Korea who say that government usually either gets in the way of Korean culture and entertainment or jumps on the bandwagon when it's already moving forward. So I'm going to place a question mark behind any governmental claims to being behind or involved with Korea's growing soft power. Full disclosure, of course, I'm saying that, I realize I'm saying that while appearing as a guest on a government-owned TV station, so my position is also a little bit compromised there.
Right, I see. Nicola, on a light note, there was also quite a bit of talk about President Yoon's rendition of Don McLean's American Pie during the state dinner at the White House. What were your thoughts about the performance?
I thought he had a surprisingly good singing voice, actually. And
me too.
Yeah, and I love that song. I was a bit sad that he didn't go to the chorus because I particularly like the chorus. But yeah, it was a light-hearted. It may have been a little bit staged. There was a piano there ready, but who cares? It was a light-hearted, humanizing moment. Everybody enjoyed it. And I think these kind of moments are very important in international diplomacy. They just make a connection between people on a deeper level, eases the way for talks and much more difficult topics and discussions.
Right, there he is on screen right now singing, right?
Some sing touch me deep inside the day. The music died.
There you have it, my favorite line right there.
Yeah, it's a nice moment. he put himself in a vulnerable position to saying, you know, you open yourself up to criticism, mockery, but I think it worked very well in his favour. I just think it's a shame that President Biden didn't reciprocate with a K-pop song.
Right, that would have made a nice touch, though. Jacco, did you see the footage?
Oh, I definitely saw the footage, and I was reminded of other similar cases where foreign leaders played or sang American music. There was, in the 1990s, Chinese President Jiang Zemin sang Elvis Presley's Love Me Tender. Who could forget that one? More recently, the Speaker of the Israeli Knesset played Hotel California on guitar at a dinner for the U.S. Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. And Junichiro Koizumi, former Japanese Prime Minister, he was also a big Elvis Presley fan. He sang together with Hollywood actor Tom Cruise, and then later visited Graceland with President George Bush. So I think this is, as you say, it's part of summitry, it's part of the pageantry and the humanizing touch of summit politics around the world.
Right. Jacco, let's move over to President Yoon's speech to the joint session of the U.S. Congress the day after his summit. Speaking within your capacity as a media personnel, what were your thoughts regarding the content of his speech and perhaps a response from the audience?
Yeah, President Yoon was the first South Korean president to address a joint sitting of the U.S. Congress. Before him, there was Syngman Rhee, Roh Tae-woo, Kim Yong-sam, Kim Dae-jung, Lee Myung-bak, and Park Geun-hye. They've also done it. But President Yoon gave a good, solid speech, about 45 minutes long. He hit all the major points, of course, about the United States and the Republic of Korea having a mutually beneficial relationship. He specifically pointed to a tripling of investment by Korean companies in America, and that Korean companies produce things in America and create jobs for America, thousands of American workers. President Yoon also made a joke about BTS being the first to hit the White House before him, but he beat them to the U.S. Capitol. Then he made some statements about democracy, freedom and rule of law being at risk in the world, and stressed the importance of freedom and peace. And by doing that, he was harking back to his inauguration speech last year, in which he talked a lot about freedom there. President Yoon promised that Korea will fulfill its responsibility in the international community and fight for freedom in the world, and that Korea would continue to work towards the whole denuclearization of not just North Korea, but the whole Korean peninsula, and will work to promote freedom in North Korea. So these are important points. And we already mentioned that he spoke out strongly against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Then he turned his attention to the Indo-Pacific theatre, of which Korea is a part of. And he said that Korea is committed to promoting a rules-based international order. And in doing so, he said that the stage for the US-Korea alliance is expanding, and that the alliance for justice and peace and prosperity. So it's for all those things. He got 10 standing ovations at least. I lost count after 10. So
more than two dozen, I believe.
He had a heck of a lot, yes. Right. And he got a big raucous welcome at the beginning and a big thank you at the end. So I think that he and his government can feel happy with the way that it went and how it was received.
Right, indeed. All right, Jacco, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today. And Nicola, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Issues and Insiders. We'll be back same time tomorrow. That is Wednesday. Join us then.